My name is Justin Davis. I am a native Mainer, and I'm very happy to be here working with Dave. Before I dive into my presentation, I want to congratulate the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine and their members again on a huge legal victory yesterday in their case with 72-hour waiting periods. As probably already noted, we're facing an onslaught from out-of-state groups here who are looking to pass gun control. Many of you have been in this fight for years, and it's nothing new, right? You'll see Mike Bloomberg dump millions of dollars here to try to tip the elections because Maine's a cheap date on the political scheme as far as campaigns go. And without people like Dave, we would be in big trouble. Dave is somebody who can unify folks around issues, Republican, Democrat, in the 2A community, which I know can be a large spectrum as well. And without Dave, we wouldn't be here today. So I just want to take some time to thank Dave. The NRA appreciates everything he does. And because of his work and reputation, folks like the NRA and the NSSF are heavily involved here in Maine. So I appreciate the folks talking this morning about yellow flag. I wanted to dive in a bit here on red flag. As mentioned before, after the Lewiston shooting, the way Maine handles these issues really came into focus and it really highlighted the lack of understanding of red flag and yellow flag. And I'm going to apologize here, I'm going to keep jumping back and forth when I change slides, but it's just kind of the situation we have right here. But kind of the topic today is how extreme gun control laws allow bad actors to strip citizens of their Second Amendment rights and due process rights. So first of all, what are red flags? So-called red flags allow citizens to file petitions requesting the state to remove an individual's rights. These civil petitions are based on weak and nebulous standards, which allow the government to remove individuals' Second Amendment rights at ex parte hearings. If the petition is granted, an individual is stripped of their Second Amendment rights without any ability to defend themselves. And the really important things to key on here that makes a difference between yellow flag and red flag is that red flag laws simply remove firearms from an individual and in no way address underlying dangerousness or issues with that person. They're not bringing the person in protective custody. They're not bringing those people mental health issue care, which they desperately need. Instead, it's just a deprivation of one's rights that's not based on a criminal conviction or a mental adjudication, but rather third-party accusations. Again, red flag laws only remove firearms from the situation. They in no way whatsoever address the person in need. They don't bring them in protective custody. They don't bring them into mental health care facilities. They simply show up unannounced, take somebody's firearms and say, you've been ordered in 21 days, you have a hearing, you may be able to get your rights back then, you may be deprived for a year, good luck getting an attorney. You are allowed, under the way they're describing this law in Maine, to have a public defender. Many of you who've been in the legislative process know there's major issues with the public defender's office here in Maine. So that creates a further issue about due process rights. So how do red flag laws really work? So law enforcement or family members petition the court to remove an individual of their Second Amendment rights in an ex parte hearing. An ex parte petition is a legal proceeding where only one party involved in the case is present before the judge, meaning the other party is not given notice or the opportunity to be heard. Typically, a hearing will be held in 14 to 21 days where the aggrieved individual will have their rights removed and be able to have their day in court. But during this period, the defendant has no legal recourse to reinstate their rights. They simply have to wait an administrative holding period until they can complete their case. So as mentioned, typically how red flag law works in other states, an emergency order will be granted, which will typically last between 14 and 21 days. And those orders typically last to about a year. It can be renewed annually. However, some states like California actually allow a 5-year deprivation of rights once you've been accused of a red flag. Now you do have the opportunity to protest that annually, but they are allowed to grant up to 5 years, which is pretty extreme compared to other states, which typically we see around 1 year. I think we've talked a lot about due process violations today. I don't think we need to kind of beat that dead horse here, but again, I just wanted to make a point that the deprivation of one's rights is not based on a criminal conviction or mental adjudication, but rather third-party accusations. So just because somebody has an episode or has been wrongfully accused of being quote-unquote dangerous and they're unable to support their case after their hearing or even before that where they would have an opportunity to do that, you're removing many rights, not just the Second Amendment rights, which we'll dive into now. So one issue that doesn't get talked about a lot is how red flag laws actually impact First Amendment rights. An individual can be issued a red flag order for simply expressing their First Amendment rights, and in today's hyper-partisan political environment, individuals can be ordered a red flag for expressing political views that may be seen as quote-unquote extreme, protesting government actions, or civil disagreements. Threatening to remove one's Second Amendment rights for exercising First Amendment rights certainly disenfranchises gun owners. And it's not just the NRA that believes this. The ACLU actually agrees with us on this issue. In Rhode Island, the ACLU put out a statement about their red flag law, about the concerns about how they could be used to tamper one's First Amendment rights, including red flagging folks who are engaged in quote-unquote overgrown political rhetoric on social media, how folks who are perceived possibly in criminal activity could be used to shortcut seize lawfully owned weapons. Finally, which I found really interesting, was the idea that police officers and law enforcement could use it at protests or legal First Amendment gatherings to warn people, you better not do this or we'll be red flagging you with your Second Amendment rights. So you think of that in Augusta, right? When we have these Second Amendment rallies where people come from all over to about hunting rights, about whatever the flavor of the week is that week that Bloomberg's trying to take away from people's gun rights. Well, if they don't want them to there say, it'd be a real shame if all of you got your red flag order today. Now, a lot of people in this room may say, I'll take that risk and I'll still express my First Amendment rights to protect my Second Amendment rights. But that certainly is a deterrent for many people. So it provides a huge, huge, huge overstep of authority for the government, both federally and the state level. Now, of course, it also violates Second Amendment rights, right? So you're taking away somebody's firearms, their constitutional rights on something that is not a criminal conviction, a mental adjudication. Those persons not technically prohibited at that time, simply based on hearsay. So for 14 to 21 days, you have absolutely no legal recourse. The state can come in unbeknownst to you in the middle of the night and make you aware that you have been removed of your Second Amendment rights, and you have an opportunity during that period to obtain legal representation, and hopefully you have a successful hearing, and hopefully you don't have to wait a year. And so during that time, those folks have no legal recourse. They have no way to regain those rights, and puts them, both their families, at danger if they feel the necessary to protect their families. But also, we're talking about major property, right? So some of these firearms cost several $1,000s. They may be family heirlooms. They may be passed down. Now, I know a lot of people probably think that when those firearms are taken, they're put in a nice gun safe, or a nice Liberty safe with a nice humidifier in there to protect those. If you've been in an evidence locker room, I can assure you that your prized possession, your family heirloom, grandpa's Winchester repeater, is not being taken care of the way you'd like. So that puts the state at a liability as well. What happens if those get damaged? What happens if they get lost? There are a lot of administrative issues as well that we'll dive in on that. And of course, there's Fourth Amendment rights. The defendant has no right to legal representation at the ex parte hearing. It creates search and seizure violations once the red flag is ordered. Police are ordered to the defendant's home or when they're in public to demand all their known firearms, search their home, confiscate all known firearms without prior notice. And it essentially is creating new stop and frisk policies, right? So if folks wanted to abuse this, they could say, hey, we think so-and-so is a problem, let's red flag him, let's see if we can go in and see what he has. Maybe he has contraband, maybe he has firearms, maybe he has drugs, maybe he has anything that they want to use. So it's basically a sweeping tool that allows the government to violate one's rights without any recourse. And of course, there's Fifth Amendment rights that doesn't get discussed very often. So once these ex parte orders are issued, you are in violation of owning a firearm, right? Unbeknownst to you, from that exact moment that that's ordered, you have now are actually technically creating a felon act by owning that firearm. And when the police show up to your home or in public and say, give us all your firearms, you are required to tell them everything that you own. If not, you'll be in violation of that order. But the simple act that you already have those firearms and you're self-incriminating yourself, saying, I own these firearms, they're in my home, even though I'm a technically prohibited person, creates many Fifth Amendment concerns. And those folks who decide to, roll the dice and say, I know my rights, I'm going to not self-incriminate, could lead to further criminal offenses and legal penalties, including jail time, fines, and further restrictions. As mentioned before, this creates a ton of issues for the state. Red flag laws lack clear direction of how to transfer, store, and care for certain property. Some folks have said, hey, you can give it to a family member. Some folks say you have to give it to the state, you have to give it to an FFL. These laws are typically written with no input from these stakeholders. I can assure you that FFLs do not want to take in firearms from people they do not know who may be a danger, who may be a problem. And then the state likely doesn't want to take it because it puts them at liability. They don't want to be in the position of storing thousands, possibly, of firearms that could be of immense value, and then be in a legal battle about it that if issues happen to that firearm. So say you have a 100-year-old firearm that was passed down through your family, that's of important nature to you. Now it's rusted and beat up and dented and lost all value, or maybe they just can't find it. It's in the evidence room and sorry, we can't find it. Well, what's your recourse as a defendant there? The other big issue is that there's no guarantee once you're red flagged that you'll ever be able to buy another firearm again. Typically, red flag orders get reported to NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check, run by the FBI, where you have to use to purchase firearms through FFLs, and now it remains new background check laws for any advertised sale. So if I want to go buy a firearm from Dave, and I was red flagged a few years ago, and I think I'm good now, my order's gone away, we go down to Cabela's to do that transfer, and we're told, I'm sorry, but you're a prohibited individual. And I look into it, and they say, well, you've been red flagged. Well, my red flag order was taken away. It was erroneous. There was no reason for me to have it. Well, NICS doesn't know that. And if any of you had a deal with NICS or trying to get any records taken away from NICS, well, good luck. I hope you have a good lawyer and a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time to do it, because there's no process and no guarantee that you'll be removed from that list. Furthermore, just because one was filed and one ex parte issue was ordered, you may spend the rest of your life a prohibited person with your Second Amendment rights completely blocked. I think this is super important. So we've been doing a lot of research, and we found a study from UC Davis in 2020 regarding California's red flag law, which is one of the more extreme laws in the country. And the study looked at how does red flag laws impact minorities and people of low income and people who may have been perceived as a target of the police, right? And so that study looked at how does red flag laws in California interact with minority communities? And here's what they found. This is from UC Davis. Not a place that you'd expect to agree with the NRA on many things. No Black or Hispanic or Latinx individuals who are subject to an IRPO had family or household members submit that petition. Not a single one. Compared with other racial ethnic groups, Black and Hispanics individuals subject to IRPOs were more often arrested at the time the order was served than their counterparts. And Black respondents were also less likely to have documented firearm access and legal representation at IRPO hearings. So at a time where we're looking at, how are people who are low income, who are maybe disenfranchised or not have the same equality in the legal system, these red flag laws can be absolutely used to target those individuals. So you're seeing a lot more groups who represent minority groups who are raising this concern. We talked a lot about Maine. We talked about many issues about public safety, and folks have brought up the concern about how it impacts folks in these communities. Well, red flag laws, if you're worried about the expansion of rights or lack thereof, taking away individuals' rights for these communities, red flag laws should certainly be of concern to you. And I want to do a couple case studies, right? So I want to choose a perceived Democratic state. Massachusetts is pretty strong Democrat at this point, and a perceived red state in Florida, and kind of how these states handle red flag and how they played out. In Florida, from 2018 to 2022, 97% of red flag petitions that were requested were ordered at ex parte hearings. So essentially every single one, pretty much, has been, if you were filed a petition for an ex parte hearing for an emergency removal of firearms, that was granted. Polk County which is the highest rate of red flags in the state, is red flag petitioning children as young as 7 and 8 years old. Let me repeat that. Children who are not old enough to drive, children who are in first and second and third grade or in elementary school are getting red flagged by police officers, by the sheriff's office. They're showing up at their home, removing firearms, I guess, from 7 and 8 year olds, and giving them a lifetime stain on their record of having a red flag. When you go to join the military, when you go to get a college education, when you do anything for the rest of your life, an 8-year-old, because he said something on the playground when he was in a scuffle, could have their entire life changed. And it's also disproportionately used throughout the entire state. It depends on where you live is your likelihood of getting red flagged, and we're going to dive into some statistics here in a minute. But it's not a blanket thing, right? It's not like we're seeing in Maine where there's pretty proportional use that's happened post-Lewiston. This is where basically if you have a sheriff who's gung-ho and wants to really expand his power, you're seeing a lot more red flags take place. And in Massachusetts, Dave touched on it before, Massachusetts is home to the most extreme gun control in the state. They realize their red flag, their quote-unquote standard red flag that they want to implement here in Maine is not working. So what have they done in their recent gun control bill? They've enhanced red flag, and they allow over a dozen classes of individuals to file a petition against another individual for red flag. So we go back to the First Amendment issue. I would say school board meetings have become a center of concern for a lot of people where they're getting heated to discuss what's happening in their children's school. Well, somebody says something they don't like in that school hearing, they may get a little heated. Next thing you know, you go back the next day, you're red flagged because of what you said at that hearing. So, we're seeing these classes get built out very far. In Massachusetts, you have school officials, you have healthcare workers, you have public safety individuals, basically anybody who works in a government stance at this point now is able to file a petition at any moment. And again, as you see in other states like Florida, if that's filed, judges almost nearly always accept it. So this is a report from ABC News in Florida that showed that 97%, like we mentioned before, these red flag petitions were accepted. The Polk County Sheriff's Office was red flagging children as young as 8 years old and examined how many that happened. So 450 children have been filed red flag petitions during 2018 to 2022, and that was increasing. And ABC News found that the law that was created to keep guns away from Floridians who threatened to hurt themselves or others was being against use kids who could not legally drive to their court hearing, while others were barely old enough to sign their name. So that took effect in March 2018. Had filed RPOs against children as young as 8 and 9 years old. The sheriff had said, when asked about it by the news, he said, if you're old enough to threaten somebody, you're old enough to be held accountable in court. So these are 8 and 9-year-olds who are just, again, maybe having a scuffle, maybe saying they say something they shouldn't in court, but now are being held through an ERPO for up to a year. Their families being held hostage by this situation, and now have the rest of their life ruined because of something they said when they're 8 years old.
Justin, what is the age to own a firearm in Florida?
I believe it's 21. Yep. So, yeah.
So that child that just got red flag cannot own a firearm.
Correct.
Cannot purchase a firearm.
Correct. For 13 years.
And some of the research that I looked at actually said that in some of these households there weren't any firearms.
Correct. So these red flag petitions do not mean that someone owns firearms, right? There's no way of them knowing. There's no gun registry that says, you know, Justin Davis owns X firearms, we got to go pick them up. These are simply hearsay. This is saying an 8-year-old threatened my son. I want them to go to the house and take all the firearms to the family because I feel threatened.
So aren't you actually red flagging the family?
Correct. And also under federal law, just because an individual is prohibited in the home does not mean that everybody in that domicile is prohibited, right? So if you have a son that was arrested and is now prohibited, does not mean that you as a father can no longer own firearms. However, the use of this red flag law with minors is saying that if you're going there and you own, because the child's not owning firearms 8 years old, as they shouldn't be in Florida, then they're going after the family as well. And here's a really helpful view of when we talk about disproportionate use throughout the state. So as you can see on this map, there's the frequency rate of red flag petitions being used throughout Florida. And Highlands and Polk County are among the highest users per capita. As you can see, the yellow circles represent the per capita use versus the red circles that are just the total frequencies. And Polk, which is the sheriff who is red flagging 8 and 9-year-olds, is one of the highest, and Highlands is way outside the mean here. The mean is actually 0.362. Highlands is using it 3.152 per 1,000 citizens. So I highly doubt there's anything happening in Highlands specifically that's creating a near that kind of disparity. So again, depending on where you live is how you're impacted by this law. And we're lucky in Maine. So in these super partisan times, you know, there's very few opportunities where folks kind of come together. However, red flag is one of the places where it does. Year after year, anti-gun advocates introduce red flag bills, and year after year they fail. This is thanks to a large coalition of bipartisan lawmakers who understand the real risk of red flags and their constitutional rights. Red flag has such a lack of support in Maine that progressive leaders could not even run it on the floor last session. And in our State of the State address, Governor Mills noted that it would undermine Maine's current law. And so, you know, there's actually, we actually just ran, Dave, myself, and Laura Whitcomb over at Gun Owners of Maine, actually just run an op-ed in the Portland Press Herald after the editorial board decided to make the issue of guns a completely partisan issue, which just isn't true, right? If you look at, I mean, Maine's been Democrat controlled for quite some time now, yet we've been able to block many anti-gun laws. And I think this is kind of the biggest one that you see of folks coming together saying, I'm putting the partisan issues beside, I'm putting the outside lobby beside of the Bloomberg groups and saying, what is this impact on public safety and constitutional rights in Maine? And there's no bigger danger to Maine than red flag laws. So what can we expect next with the red flag referendum? The proponents will run an extremely well-funded persuasion campaign run by out-of-state elites. They'll run an aggressive media campaign filled with TV, digital, and print ads distorting the truth about red flags. And they'll prey completely on emotions instead of facts. So as we go here across the next year and we work with Dave and we work with you and our SAM members and NRA members, we need to get the word about the facts and the real dangers here. I think when people hear about the way red flag issues impact minorities, people who are low income, people who are 8 and 9 years old, 8 and 9 years old, the rest of your life staying because of something you said, because the sheriff said that you need to be red flagged and your family can't own firearms on hearsay and weak and nebulous standards. I think that's too extreme for Maine. I don't know who wouldn't think that. But you know, we're ready for a fight. We're ready to take it to them, and we're going to stick by our word. We're going to stick by the facts, and bring a well-organized campaign to protect Maine from these egregious rights violations. So I'm happy to take any questions there may be. Turn over to you all.
At this time, there are some folks that indicated they had questions. Go ahead and you can either, the legislators can join us here. If there's any more legislators who want to come up here. But anyone who has a question, now's the time to answer it.
You're in a real friendly room. How are you going to address the people down in southern Maine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually from southern Maine, so I have a lot of good connections down there and kind of understand what people think about this. And you know, I think we got back to the partisan issue of this, and people think that all gun rights issues are partisan, and they're really not, right? So there's a massive, massive amount of Mainers who own firearms on all sides of the aisle. Left, right, poor, rich, no matter what your background is, people own firearms in Maine. And so when we talk about this, I think we have to bring these real facts that touch people. I think a lot of times as gun advocates, we kind of get stuck in this mode of saying, you know, due process violations, Second Amendment rights violations, and that's true. But we need to tell the story of real issues, how this has been impacted. We need to tell the stories of Florida families who have had their lives ruined because of an erroneous red flag order against their child. We need to talk about how this has impacted people in California or Massachusetts who may not be able to represent themselves in court, and tell these real life stories. I think I'll give the credit to the anti-gun groups. They've done a fantastic job of storytelling over the last decade. We've been stuck on facts, and facts are great, but we also need to be telling stories about how these real life Mainers will be impacted and bring that story to them. And I think with the right persuasion and the facts, I think we'll be highly successful.
How are you going to do?
I think more will be coming out about the strategy on the campaign. I don't know if this is the correct forum to discuss it, and I'm happy to talk with you off mic about kind of what we're looking at.
I want to back up for a second. There's some smart people in this room. When red flag laws were created, it was specifically to take firearms away from dangerous people. An 8 and 9-year-old cannot own firearms, cannot purchase them. How can a red flag law apply to an individual who can't own and possess and purchase firearms? When I saw that headline, I was just in shock, and this is why. Most people don't know that in Florida, juvenile records are not sealed. So if a red flag is conducted against an 8-year-old child who said something on the playground, that's going to follow them in their record for the rest of their life. You just changed the course of a child's life. I'll ask you this, many of you are parents. Do kids know the consequences of their statements? I know my brothers and sisters have said some pretty tough things to me over my lifetime. And should that alter a child's life? And lastly, an 8, 9-year-old can't even buy a firearm until they're 21. So ask yourself this, why would a sheriff in Polk County apply red flags to children? Ask yourself why and how. And I'll give you the answer to that. It's because they can. And red flags allow a person's personal feelings and opinions to dictate who gets red flagged. You heard this morning how our process has built-in due process protections to ensure that a person's opinion doesn't destroy another person's life. That is the distinct difference between red and yellow flag. Based on a person's activist sheriff or an activist, we've seen it, attorney general in some states, if you can get an activist anti-gun sheriff elected, you just gave them the power to ruin people's lives. That is, I think, the scariest part for me, is you're giving this immense power to people with a political agenda.
And to build off that, Dave, I think if you look at the trend and kind of what's happening in the main political scene, especially with our DA races, I mean, you're seeing massive amounts of money being spent by outside groups to get people of a specific political designation into these DA offices. And if you don't think that that's not important, I'd suggest you open your eyes on how that will impact this as well.
Some questions?
David,
Yes.
just thought I'd mention some efforts that we've made. We've actually done quite a bit, and it was rebuffed by the people in my party. I'm one of those strange pro-gun Democrats. I drive a Prius, and I'm a lawyer, and live in southern Maine, and you'd think I'd be the Antichrist, but I guess maybe I'm not. But we've actually done a lot to try to have an arrangement where it can be regularized and inspected. If you've got prohibited people in the house, the rest of the people don't have to forfeit their Second Amendment right. And that was rebuffed by the Speaker of the House, which to me is absolute madness. Yeah, we're doing this to protect you, but we don't want to actually protect you. And I think that's the agenda that's going down here. The one thing that I think should also be said is if little kids have possession of firearms in an adult's home, you don't need a red flag process. You've got endangering the welfare of a child now under current law. You can get warrants for arrests of those parents. You've got probable cause to believe that.
Absolutely, and I think that's an important point, is that there's plenty of opportunities to address some of the issues of these concerns, right? So if somebody's truly endangered themselves and others, bringing them into protective custody, making sure they're not hurting people, they're not hurting themselves. By simply going there and taking their firearm and saying good luck, I mean, look at what's happening in other parts of the country and around the world with some of the issues with vehicle manslaughter, knife attacks. I mean, you're not taking that person out of the equation, you're simply taking guns away as a feel-good measure for yourself. So there's plenty of opportunities, whether it's a criminal conviction, mental adjudication, protective custody. Do it the right way. I think that's the important thing. And I know Maine is working very hard on that to make sure we get that right. And just throwing all that out to pass a boilerplate Bloomberg law that's been used in California, Massachusetts, and other states is not the right way for Maine, I don't think.
Any more questions?
Just one, is our yellow flag on the radar of any other states right now? Are they looking at what we're doing?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, please do.
When this law first passed, what I said publicly, what I said to the frontline reporters when they interviewed me for 3 hours for that frontline piece that they never even got a single comment from me that they did on TV, was that had the Gun Safety Coalition embraced what we had done, this could have been a model for the other, 30 states, almost 30 states that do not have this type of law. There are, we all know it, there are liberal states, there are moderate states, and then there are conservative states. For those moderate and conservative states that don't have anything, this could have been a tool that not only has the due process, it has been tested in Maine Supreme Court and determined to be constitutional. So their almost obsession with checking the box to get red flag in Maine, they have buried their head in the sand, and they have missed an opportunity to go to those other states and say, hey, it worked in Maine. It has due process. It's been tested. This is an option for you. But keep this in mind. They don't want to do that because it's not part of their agenda. I have found that the Gun Safety Coalition has a box that they want to check each session, whether it's a 72-hour waiting period or magazine capacity, red flag. That's their agenda. And they don't see a better wheel being made or a better law like ours as success. They see it as a loss. When you look at those charts with 672 people who have been helped by our law, I ask you, is our law better? Is our law working? Is it saving lives? That should be the only thing they care about. But they don't. They only care about winning. And in this case, what concerns me is they'll say just about anything to confuse the Maine people. And we're going to have a discussion around the state of journalism in Maine at the end of this day today. I encourage you to stay because without independent journalism, without people fact checking what we've been saying, how are people in Cumberland County and York County, who have the two heaviest populations in Maine, going to learn the facts when the Press Herald, almost a year prior to the referendum, are already railing against Maine's law and calling for red flag without even knowing the facts, without listening to the debate? They've had their own editorial to scrap what they call scary or whatever that was, terrifying. They called Maine's law terrifying. They labeled it. How do we get to the facts if we aren't pushing back? And in this case, the facts are on our side. That's why you'll see more and more of these events. This is a complicated issue. But without a truly independent press to bring out the facts, Maine people are potentially going to be voting on something that could cost lives. You think about it. If they're successful in supplanting our law, used almost 700 times, and go to this red flag, and they stop doing these that you see over here, do you think the public's going to be any safer? No. Our communities are going to be dangerous, and people are going to die, be harmed, and commit suicide because these people have their head in the sand, and they only care about winning. And that's the frustrating part for me, is that we did something amazing, it's saving lives. Why in the world are we even here? So that's my thoughts on it. I'd be curious to see what you guys think of that, but this seems nuts to me.
Well, it's a huge attack on our firearms and our rights, our Second Amendment rights. One concern that I had going into the yellow flag, yellow papering process with Senator Kine and David Trahan here, when we were with Attorney Langhauser, was under red flag or what have you. My guns, when they confiscate my firearms, I've been deemed a harmful person to myself or someone else. Where do they go? Well, the law enforcement has a steel container out back, not air conditioned or what have you. And the guns or firearms, when you get them back in 5 or 8 or whatever years, are just a big thing of rust. I said, well, I have 50 firearms for deer hunting, moose hunting, all that kind of thing. I love hunting. My wife and my son more so than me. So if I'm deemed a hazard, do all of my 50 firearms that are confiscated go to this lockup and they're ruined? My wife loses her right to be able to go deer hunting, and my son? I'd like a fix here. And what they determined was that if my firearms are taken from me, maybe they can go to Senator Kime's house. She'll take care of them, and there'd be repercussions under the law for her if she gave me them back, and therefore they're properly taken care of. The fact that they might go to a gun shop, I asked the gun shop folks, we don't want them. We don't have the room for them. That's not something we need. So under the yellow papering, they really took care of good detail to safely get the firearms away from me until I can be deemed not harmful anymore, and then return to my house and my wife could go over to Senator Kine, get her firearm, go shoot a deer or what have you, and whatnot. If you want.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Senator Hagan. And I think one of the big problems here is that the folks who are pushing these laws, they just don't understand firearms or how they're stored or how they're kept, or they just don't. They're afraid of firearms in many cases, right? They don't want people to own firearms. I've been told by these people to my face that they wish the Second Amendment was just repealed straight out, right? I mean, I don't think that started from a good faith effort to find a reasonable ground here. And so when people have so little experience or knowledge with them, it's not surprising to see they don't think of the aspects of how are these going to be stored, how are they going to be transferred, how are they going to be transferred back? Do you have to go through you have to go through back another background check? But now with Maine's waiting period law, you just got found that you were erroneously charged with a red flag order, and now you have to get your property back. Hopefully it's in good condition. Now you got to go to who knows where. Maybe they're stored in Augusta and you live in Madawaska. You got to come down to Augusta, run your background check. You got to wait 3 more days, go back. I mean, none of this stuff is fleshed out, and they don't have an interest in it. And to build on Dave's point as well, is that these are not ideas unique to Maine. I cover Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Mass. And the same things that they're pushing in Maine are the same thing they're pushing in Vermont, the same thing they're pushing in New Hampshire, and it's just a national agenda. They don't sit down, they don't talk to these folks about, they don't meet with guys like Dave. They don't meet with folks like you to say, hey, what's really going on here? It's a political agenda to disarm and disenfranchise Maine gun owners, to reduce the amount of gun owners, to reduce the power that the voting bloc has, to protect the rights of constitutional Americans. So it's a grave outlook for what's happening next. You're going to see a ton of money poured into this race. You want to talk about a blank check? I mean, look what's happened before with the bear baiting referendum and background checks. The only way to beat it is through grassroots, through working hard, getting involved with your local club, paying your SAM member dues, finding ways to help out. So, and I'll be here. I'm happy to talk with any of you. We're standing by with Dave hand in hand like we do on all these battles. You're in good hands with Dave here on the show. So.
Yeah, I was a sitting legislator at the time the law went in, and I want to just publicly